Hello, welcome to this tutorial on the evidence hierarchy in healthcare. Whenever we talk about making decisions in medicine, whether it's approving a new drug, updating treatment guidelines, or deciding on reimbursement, everything comes down to evidence. But here's the challenge. Not all evidence is created equal. Some types of data give us a clearer, more reliable picture than others. A single case report may raise an important question, but it won't change clinical practice. On the other hand, a well-designed randomized trial, or even better, a systematic review of many trials, can completely shift how we treat patients. And then there's the growing role of real-world evidence, showing us how treatments perform in everyday practice, far beyond the walls of a controlled clinical study. In this session, we'll break down the levels of the evidence pyramid, explore the strengths and limitations of clinical trials, highlight the importance of systematic reviews and meta-analyses, and then spend time on real-world evidence, how it evolved, how it's being adopted, and why it's become a critical part of modern decision-making. By the end of this tutorial, you'll see that evidence is not about choosing one type over another. It's about understanding how each piece fits into the bigger puzzle, and how integration of different types of evidence drives smarter science, better policies, and improved patient care. Let's begin by looking at the evidence hierarchy in healthcare. This concept is fundamental, because while there are many types of evidence we can generate, not all evidence carries equal weight when it comes to shaping decisions. The idea of an evidence hierarchy is that we rank different study designs based on how reliable and trustworthy they are. At the bottom, you'll find things like expert opinions or case reports, useful in some contexts, but prone to bias. As you move up, you encounter observational studies, randomized controlled trials, and finally, systematic reviews and meta-analyses, which sit at the very top. Why does this hierarchy matter? Because in medicine, decisions can affect patient safety, resource allocation, and even regulatory approvals. Higher levels of evidence reduce bias and increase reliability, meaning the conclusions are more likely to hold true in different populations and settings. For example, if you hear about a new treatment from a single physician's case study, it's interesting but limited. If the same treatment shows benefit in a large randomized clinical trial, that's far more convincing. And if multiple trials are pooled into a systematic review that confirms consistent benefit, then decision makers, from clinicians to payers, can feel much more confident. So the hierarchy is not just a theoretical pyramid. It's a practical tool that helps regulators, healthcare professionals, and medical affairs teams understand what kind of evidence carries the greatest weight in guiding practice and policy. To understand the hierarchy of evidence, it helps to picture a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid, we have the types of evidence that are the easiest to generate, but the least reliable. Things like expert opinions, case reports, and case series. These can be helpful for raising early questions, spotting unusual events, or sharing new experiences. But because they lack controls and can be influenced by personal bias, their reliability is limited. Moving up, we encounter observational studies, such as cohort studies and case control studies. These give us real-world insights and can identify associations between risk factors and outcomes. For example, linking smoking to lung cancer started with observational research. However, because these studies don't randomize patients, confounding factors can distort the results. Then we come to randomized controlled trials, RCTs. These are considered the gold standard for testing interventions because randomization helps eliminate bias and allows for cause and effect conclusions. A well-designed RCT can show not just an association, but that a treatment truly works. At the very top of the pyramid, systematic reviews, and meta-analyses. These combine results from multiple studies to provide the most reliable summary of evidence available. Instead of relying on one trial, they synthesize the weight of all relevant evidence, offering a balanced, comprehensive conclusion. So, the pyramid isn't just about ranking. It reflects the journey from anecdote to proof, from opinion to evidence that can drive guidelines, shape policy, and improve patient care. When we talk about the evidence hierarchy, randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, are considered the gold standard, and for good reason. First, RCTs use randomization, which minimizes bias and balances both known and unknown factors between groups. This means we can be confident that differences in outcomes are due to the intervention itself, not outside influences. Second, RCTs are unique because they provide strong evidence of cause and effect. Observational studies might show that patients who take a drug live longer, but is that because of the drug or because healthier patients are more likely to take it? Only a randomized trial can really sort that out. Third, RCTs form the foundation for regulatory approvals, clinical guidelines, and medical practice. Agencies like the FDA or EMA rely on well-designed trials to determine whether a treatment is both safe and effective. Similarly, guideline committees prioritize trial evidence when recommending standards of care. A good example is the development of modern cancer immunotherapies. These treatments were introduced into practice not because of isolated case reports, but because large-scale randomized trials proved survival benefits. So yes, RCTs are the cornerstone of evidence-based medicine, but they are not perfect. As we'll see next, their limitations remind us why real-world evidence has become increasingly important in complementing traditional trials. Even though randomized controlled trials are the gold standard, they come with important limitations. First, they are expensive and time-consuming. A single phase 3 clinical trial can cost hundreds of millions of dollars and take years to complete. This makes it difficult to generate trial evidence quickly, especially when new questions emerge in fast-moving fields. Second, trials often apply strict inclusion and exclusion criteria. Patients with multiple comorbidities, older adults, or those from underrepresented ethnic groups are frequently excluded. While this improves control in the study, it reduces generalizability. In practice, the patients doctors see in clinics often look very different from the trial population. Third, RCTs may not reflect real-world practice. In trials, patients are highly monitored, adherence is closely tracked, and follow-up is rigorous. But in real life, patients may miss doses, doctors may vary in how they apply guidelines, and systems may introduce barriers. These factors mean that the perfect world results of a trial don't always match real-world outcomes. Finally, clinical trials simply cannot answer every research question. For example, long-term safety across diverse populations, rare side effects, or patterns of off-label use are often only detected outside of the trial setting. And this is where real-world evidence, RWE, comes in. By looking at data from clinical practice, such as electronic health records, claims databases, and patient registries, RWE fills in the gaps left by clinical trials. Together, trials and RWE provide a fuller, more accurate picture of how treatments truly perform. Now let's move up to the very top of the evidence hierarchy: systematic reviews and meta-analyses. These are considered the highest level of evidence because they don't rely on just one study, but instead synthesize the findings from multiple trials to provide a clearer and more reliable picture. A systematic review is a rigorous process where researchers carefully define a question, search all relevant databases, select studies using strict inclusion criteria, and then evaluate their quality. This structured approach reduces bias and ensures that the evidence considered is both comprehensive and transparent. A meta-analysis takes it a step further. Instead of simply summarizing studies, it uses statistical techniques to pool data from several trials, creating a larger combined sample size. This makes the results more precise and can even reveal effects that individual studies were too small to detect. For example, let's say several randomized controlled trials test a new heart failure treatment. Some show a modest benefit, others are inconclusive. A meta-analysis can bring all that evidence together and show whether overall the treatment truly improves survival. These reviews don't just inform clinicians, they directly shape guidelines and policy. When organizations like the World Health Organization or NICE in the UK develop clinical recommendations, they rely heavily on systematic reviews and meta-analyses. In short, this level of evidence doesn't replace clinical trials, but it does provide a more balanced and powerful summary of the available research, helping to minimize the influence of outliers or single studies that might otherwise skew interpretation. Let's start by defining real-world evidence, or RWE. At its core, RWE refers to insights generated from data collected outside of the controlled environment of randomized trials. This means using real-world data, such as electronic health records, insurance claims, patient registries, and even digital health tools, to understand how treatments perform in everyday practice. In the traditional evidence pyramid, RWE doesn't replace randomized controlled trials or systematic reviews, but it doesn't sit at the bottom either. It occupies a unique position, higher than expert opinion or case series because it reflects large populations, but generally below randomized trials in terms of strength, since it is more vulnerable to bias and confounding. However, when designed and analyzed rigorously, RWE can rival traditional studies in relevance and impact. Why is this important? Because RWE complements RCTs. While trials are designed to answer the question, does this treatment work under ideal conditions? RWE answers, does it work in the messy, imperfect reality of everyday healthcare? For example, a randomized trial might show that a new diabetes drug lowers HbA1c significantly in a selected group of patients. But RWE can tell us whether those benefits extend to older adults, patients with multiple comorbidities, or people with poor adherence, groups often excluded from trials. So, RWE is not a replacement, but an essential partner to clinical trials. It gives us the missing perspective, how interventions actually perform in real life across diverse patient populations, healthcare systems, and cultural contexts. Not too long ago, real-world evidence was considered second-class data compared to randomized controlled trials. For decades, the mindset was that only tightly controlled studies could produce reliable insights, while observational or real-world data were seen as too messy, too biased, and too inconsistent. But things began to change with the explosion of digital health records, advanced analytics, and big data capabilities. Suddenly, we weren't just dealing with small observational datasets. We had access to millions of patient records, prescription databases, insurance claims, and disease registries that could be analyzed in sophisticated ways. This allowed patterns to emerge that were previously invisible. At the same time, healthcare stakeholders began to realize the limits of RCTs. While trials remain the gold standard for proving efficacy, they are expensive, slow, and often exclude patients who reflect real-world practice. For example, older adults, minorities, or patients with multiple conditions are typically underrepresented in trials, yet they make up a huge proportion of actual patient populations. This growing gap between trial evidence and clinical reality made room for RWE to step in. Over the past 15 years, regulators like the FDA and EMA, as well as payers worldwide, began recognizing the value of RWE. In fact, the 21st Century Cures Act in the US explicitly directed the FDA to expand the use of real-world data in regulatory decision-making. Today, RWE is no longer just a complement. It is a mainstream evidence stream, shaping approvals, reimbursement, and medical strategies globally. Its journey from secondary to essential is one of the most important shifts in modern evidence generation. To truly understand real-world evidence, we need to look at its sources. Unlike randomized trials, where every piece of data is collected in a controlled setting, RWE is generated from the day-to-day interactions patients have with the healthcare system and even their own devices. One of the most important sources is electronic health records, EHRS, and patient registries. These provide longitudinal information about diagnoses, treatments, lab results, and outcomes across large populations. For example, oncology registries can help track survival trends over decades and across different therapies. Another key source is insurance claims and billing data. These data sets may not capture clinical detail like lab results, but they provide huge volumes of information about treatment patterns, healthcare utilization, and costs. Claims data, for example, have been critical in understanding prescribing trends and economic burden in chronic diseases. We also now have data from digital health tools, wearables, and mobile apps. Devices like smartwatches can track heart rate, activity levels, and even detect arrhythmias in real time. These sources open the door to continuous monitoring of patients outside clinical settings, something trials rarely capture. Finally, patient-reported outcomes and surveys provide direct insight into the patient experience, quality of life, treatment satisfaction, side effects, and adherence. These perspectives are increasingly valued by regulators and payers, as they highlight aspects of care that go beyond traditional clinical endpoints. Together, these sources form a rich ecosystem of data. While each comes with limitations, when combined and analyzed rigorously, they generate evidence that reflects how healthcare truly works in practice, across diverse populations and real-life settings. Now that we've defined RWE and looked at its sources, let's talk about its adoption. Over the past decade, real-world evidence has moved from being an interesting idea to a tool used by virtually every stakeholder in healthcare. First, regulators. Agencies like the FDA in the US and EMA in Europe now incorporate RWE into approval pathways, especially for rare diseases and oncology. Beyond approvals, RWE plays a major role in post-marketing surveillance, detecting long-term safety issues or rare side effects that trials are too small to uncover. Second, payers and health technology assessment (HTA) bodies rely on RWE to determine reimbursement and assess value. Clinical trials may prove efficacy, but RWE shows whether a treatment reduces hospitalizations, improves adherence, or lowers overall healthcare costs. These are the metrics that drive reimbursement decisions. Third, pharmaceutical companies use RWE extensively in medical affairs and market access. RWE helps identify unmet needs, demonstrate product value, support label expansions, and inform medical strategy. For example, an MSL can use registry data to show a KOL how a therapy is performing across broader populations than those seen in trials. Finally, clinicians adopt RWE to guide everyday decision-making. If trial data suggests a drug is effective, but RWE shows it performs poorly in patients with low adherence, physicians may adjust their prescribing strategies. In short, adoption of RWE is now widespread. It's not a replacement for clinical trials, but it's a trusted companion, providing context, validation, and insights that shape the way therapies are developed, reimbursed, and used in real-world care. As powerful as real-world evidence is, it comes with both strengths and challenges. To use it effectively, we need to appreciate both sides. On the strength side, RWE includes large and diverse populations. Unlike randomized trials that exclude many groups, RWE reflects the patients seen every day in clinics. Older adults, those with multiple conditions, or populations underrepresented in trials. This diversity makes the insights highly relevant to real-world practice. Another strength is that RWE can provide long-term insights. Clinical trials usually last months or a few years, but real-world data can track outcomes over decades. This allows us to see not just efficacy, but durability of benefit, late emerging safety issues, and cost-effectiveness over time. RWE also captures patient behavior and everyday practice. It can show adherence patterns, real-world side effect reporting, and how treatment guidelines are applied or not across health systems. This kind of evidence paints a fuller picture than trial data alone. On the challenges side, RWE is more vulnerable to bias and confounding. Since patients aren't randomized, it's hard to be sure whether outcomes are due to the intervention or to other factors. Data quality also varies. Electronic health records may be incomplete, coding may differ between hospitals, and wearable data can be inconsistent. This is why RWE should complement, not replace, clinical trials. RCTs give us rigorous, controlled evidence of efficacy, while RWE shows us how those findings translate into everyday care. When combined, the two form a powerful foundation for evidence-based medicine and policy. So, the true strength of RWE lies in knowing when and how to use it, as a partner to trials, not a substitute. As we wrap up this session, it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture of evidence integration. The reality is that no single type of evidence is enough on its own. Each brings strengths, each has limitations, and the real power comes when we put them together. Randomized controlled trials remain the gold standard for proving efficacy. They tell us whether an intervention works under ideal controlled conditions. Without them, we would have no reliable basis for approvals or clinical guidelines. But trials alone don't tell us how a therapy performs in everyday practice. That's where real-world evidence steps in. RWE shows effectiveness in routine care, captures diverse populations, and provides insights into cost, safety, and adherence over the long term. Meanwhile, systematic reviews and meta-analyses bring it all together. By pooling multiple trials and sometimes integrating real-world data, they provide the most balanced and comprehensive picture, reducing the risk of drawing conclusions from a single, possibly biased study. For regulators, this integration means more informed approval and monitoring decisions. For payers, it ensures reimbursement decisions are grounded not just in efficacy, but also in real-world value. For clinicians, it means having both the confidence of trial data and the practicality of real-world insights to guide patient care. So the message is clear. It's not trials versus RWE, it's trials plus RWE, supported by systematic reviews. When combined, they create a strong evidence ecosystem, one that drives better science, smarter policies, and ultimately improved patient outcomes. As we close this tutorial, let's come back to the big message. Evidence is the foundation of healthcare decisions, but no single type tells the whole story. Randomized trials prove efficacy under ideal conditions. Systematic reviews summarize the bigger picture by pooling multiple studies, and real-world evidence reveals how treatments truly perform in diverse, everyday settings. Together, they form a strong and balanced ecosystem of knowledge. For regulators, this integration ensures safer approvals. For payers, it means reimbursement is based on real-world value. For clinicians, it provides confidence to treat patients not just with science, but with relevance. And for medical affairs professionals, it offers the framework to communicate evidence credibly and strategically. So, the next time you see a new study, don't ask only, what does this trial show? Instead, ask, where does this fit in the evidence hierarchy? And how does it connect with the rest of the data we have? That's the mindset that turns data into decisions and decisions into better outcomes for patients. Thank you and see you soon.